Bob Butler, head of the National Association of Black Journalists, takes pride in the fact that some of the biggest national stories in recent years started with the black press.
If it wasn't for, the black press, we wouldn't know about things like Trayvon Martin, like the Gina 6 in Louisiana. We wouldn't know about those things because the mainstream media didn't care about those stories until they got enough traction that was started with the black press.
Still, Butler admits the black media faces challenges, some old, some new.
It's hard to get advertising revenue. That hasn't changed. You don't have the advertising revenue, then it's hard to hire the employees you need to do the work. Nowadays, people are going digital. If you don't have the money, it's hard to convert to a digital platform.
That's why Rochelle Ford, a professor at Syracuse, says black media is in crisis.
As African-American community, we're one of the most mobile-savvy communities. Unfortunately, our media aren't there.
Many of these issues were cited in a 2013 Pew Research report, which found that while African Americans consume more TV news than Americans overall, news has struggled to find a place in black programming. And Ford argues the need for black media is greater than ever before.
The need is greater because so many of our communities are relying upon news sources that are slanted, that are misrepresented, or aren't even factually even reported.
While the number of black media outlets is down, journalists like Washington Post's Wesley Lowery sees a resurgence underway.
If you look at TV One, is doing a lot of stuff right now, and they've got their own Sunday show, they're doing kind of news, and so that's been really big. And then you also have a lot of resilient black newspapers in a lot of cities, a lot of towns in D.C. and Chicago and here in Boston.
Lowery, who previously worked for the Boston Globe, says Boston is a good example of the influence of community outlets like the Dorchester Reporter or the Bay State Banner.
And one of the community papers, one of the smaller, more community-based, neighborhood-based outlets had a big story, had a big scoop, it would propel across the whole city.
But more importantly, some say, is the impact a story has closer to home.
Telling the story about the young brother who came out of Roxbury, and he could have been a gangbanger and a problem maker and ended up going to Harvard. Tell those stories, because in the greater scheme of things, they may not matter to Greater Boston, but it matters to that family, it matters to that community.
And maybe that should matter to everyone. So is there a strong future for black media? I'm joined now by Cheryl Huggins. She's the senior editor at large at The Root, an online journal dealing with African American issues. And also with us is Callie Crossley of WGBH News. She's host of the weekly radio show Under the Radar and a regular panelist on Basic Black and Beat the Press. She was also the vice president of the NABJ. Welcome to both of you, ladies.
Thank you.
Callie, let me present that question to you. Is there a future for black media?
I think there's always going to be a future for black media, and let me say more broadly, other kinds of media that fill a niche. I grew up in a household where we read everything, where my parents read everything, including always the black newspapers, because they understood that there was some absence of what was being covered in the mainstream press. Obviously, there are people like me in mainstream press now and many other people at the National Association of Black Journalists, but we are constantly made aware that there are bits and pieces and sometimes huge chunks of the perspective not covered still. I think it's changing with the demographics, but it's still, right now, there's a need.
Cheryl, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges facing black media?
Well, I think challenges include the fact that just like with all media, audiences are free to pick and choose among a number of different outlets. And so while there are issues that are still unique to African American culture and the black community that people want to know more about, by the same token, everybody can cover those issues, not that everyone is covering them well. And so this is the important thing for the black media. The fact of the matter is there's the perspective and an understanding in the community and the ability to cover things in a unique way. But capturing that audience, especially with the younger end of the demographic, is increasingly challenging.
Callie, how about you? What are some of the challenges?
Well, I think capturing the younger demographic is always a challenge, but that's a challenge across the board. But it's also an opportunity because now so much information is across the kinds of devices that they use, if you will. They don't know where it came from. They just know it arrived in on their Facebook page or on their Twitter, and that's a problem, as we know, because somebody's got to pay for this. But in terms of understanding and picking up on some of the issues, you can get a groundswell going pretty quickly once you get the attention of these young people. But the story has to be good, has to be accurate, and it needs to be something that's compelling. Hello, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing every day anyway, right?
It certainly sounds like what we're supposed to be doing. In this story, we saw someone say that the black media outlets have been slow at getting on digital. Now, you happen to work for an outlet that is on digital, but do you think that's a true statement, and why would that be the case?
It's a true statement if you look at traditional black media outlets, particularly print newspapers, who've been a mainstay. But by the same token, you have a whole new class of black outlets that have been digital from the very beginning. You have The Root, you have The Griot.
Black America Web.
Black America Web, you know, and the list goes on. And so
it sounds like you take issue with that statement.
Well, I think it depends on, you know, what part of the audience you're talking about.
If you're, and so much is based on the traditional format of the newspapers, and they were powerful instruments in getting information across to, certainly to African Americans, telling that story. But they have had trouble sometimes in the same way that some of the gray hairs at the other institutions that we all know, you know, had a trouble moving over to digital and are still navigating that. Look at the Washington Post for that. You know, Jeff Bezos may own it, but he's now trying to integrate that digital into the print. So those are, if they're having trouble at the larger outlets, you can imagine what's happening at the smaller ones. It's a constant struggle to get that done. But when you're a digital native like The Root, people get to you faster. I mean, it works.
And Jet now, they, by going all digital, and on mobile, by doing that, they are trying to see now how they can make that transition, but they're targeting a newer demographic.
Everybody, a broader audience. They're going after young and the people that they had in print aggressively.
We're just about out of time. Let me quickly ask you ladies about newsroom diversity. How do you feel about it?
It's sad. That's how I feel about it. And with the population demographics changing as fast as they are, it ought to be a lot better.
I would agree with that, and I would say that it almost seems to be going backward a little bit, and so my hope is that we can at least return to where things were maybe 10 to 15 years ago and then build upon that.
Cheryl Huggins, Kelly Crossley, good to see you both. Thank you both for being here tonight.